You already know how this ends. The Greeks can't break the walls, so they build a horse, hollow, packed with soldiers. The Trojans wheel it through their own gates. By morning, Troy is ash. You've heard the story your whole life, and this summer, millions of people watched it again, on the biggest screens in the world. But here's the part the movie doesn't tell you. The city was real. We know that now. The war? Probably. But the horse, the wooden horse full of soldiers, almost every historian who has ever studied it believes it never happened, which is a strange thing to sit with, because everyone knows the Trojan horse. It might be the most famous trick ever pulled. So how does the whole world know a story that didn't happen? And if there was no horse, how did Troy actually fall? Here's the strange part. That horse, the most famous trick in the history of war, barely exists in the story people think it comes from. Open up the Iliad, Homer's great poem of the Trojan War, and you get the rage of Achilles, the death of Hector, 10 years of siege, and then it just ends. Hector's funeral. That's the final line. No horse, no fall of the city. Homer closes the book before the most famous part even happens. The horse turns up later, and at first, barely. A handful of lines in the Odyssey where a blind poet sings about it at a feast, almost in passing. That's it. That's the whole thing. The version you actually see in your head. The soldiers holding their breath in the dark. The priest screaming that it's a trap. That one Greek left behind to sell the lie. None of that is Homer. It comes from a poem written more than 1,000 years after Troy burned, by a Roman named Virgil. And Virgil wasn't writing history. He was writing a founding myth, the origin of Rome itself, tracing the bloodline of the Emperor Augustus all the way back to a single survivor who walked out of that burning city. So the most vivid version of the horse, the one in your head, the one up on the screen this summer, was written to glorify an empire that wanted Trojan blood in its veins. The story had 1,000 years and a very motivated author to get better. So the horse is a story, a good one, good enough to outlive the empire that told it. But a real city really did burn, and its walls really came down, and the thing that broke them was no horse. It was something the Greeks were so frightened of, they blamed a god, but we'll come back to that. First, the horse itself, because the closer you look at it, the less sense it makes. Just picture it. You've been at war for 10 years. You've watched this enemy burn your farms and kill your sons. One morning, the whole army is just gone. And sitting outside your gate is an enormous wooden horse. And your response, your plan, is to tear a hole in your own wall, drag the giant mystery box inside the city, and throw a party. It's a great story. It's not a great military tactic. And that's roughly where the experts land too. The giant hollow horse, full of commandos, is almost unanimously treated as a myth. A brilliant image, not a real event. And yet, the city underneath the story is real. There's a hill in northwestern Turkey where Troy actually stood. A real place that really burned. I dug into how we found it in another video, so I'll leave that one alone here. What matters today is what came after the walls, the fall itself. So that's the puzzle. Take out the horse, the one part everyone remembers, and you're left with something harder and more real. A walled city that had held for years, and then, one day, didn't. Something got through, and whatever it was, the people who lived through it didn't remember a battle. They remembered a horse. So where did that horse come from? Historians have worked the question for a long time, and they've come back with a few very different answers. Here's the first. What if the horse wasn't an animal at all, but a machine? Ancient armies built enormous wooden siege engines, battering rams, rolling towers, the heavy machinery you need to crack a fortified city. And they had a habit of naming these machines after animals. A ram, a tortoise, a crow. So a wooden thing on wheels, with a name like an animal, rolled up against the walls of a city right before it fell. Some historians think that's not a coincidence. That's the horse. And it gets better. To keep the enemy from setting these machines on fire, crews would drape them in fresh, wet animal hides, often horsehide. Soaked skins stretched over a giant wooden frame, pushed toward a wall. Picture that from up on the walls of Troy. A vast wooden shape, wrapped in horsehide, crawling toward your gate. Then imagine that image surviving 3,000 years of retelling. Every poet trimming it, sharpening it, making it stranger. You can see how a wooden horse thing, covered in horseskin, broke our wall, slowly becomes a wooden horse. It's clean. It's plausible. It almost works. Almost. Because a war this size leaves a mess. 10 years of an army living at your gate means cook fires, graves, broken blades, the rotting frames of the machines themselves. Dig the plain outside Troy, and it should be littered with the wreckage of the largest force the Greek world would ever put in one place. And for a long time, digging that ground, they found almost none of it. No sprawling war camp, no ring of siege works, not the debris you'd expect from a decade-long assault. Which puts a hole in the machine, because a battering ram doesn't build itself, and it doesn't vanish into thin air. So this is where we actually stand. A fortress city, its walls thrown down, and barely a trace of the army that supposedly broke them. Something cracked Troy open and left almost nothing of itself behind. And the people who survived it didn't blame a general, or a weapon, or a trick at the gate. They blamed the sea god, which sounds strange right away. Troy was a city on a hill. Why would the god of the ocean have anything to do with breaking its walls? Because the sea was only Poseidon's most famous job. The Greeks gave him another one. When the ground itself shuddered and split, when a quake flattened a town in the space of a breath, that was Poseidon too. They called him the Earth Shaker. And this corner of the world kept him busy. Troy sits on a fault, a seam where two enormous plates of the Earth's crust press against each other, and every so often, slip. And when they do, the ground doesn't just tremble, it heaves. Whole cities have dropped in seconds, walls and all. And here's what's actually in the dirt. Dig down through Troy, and you don't find one city. You find many, each built on the wreck of the last. One of these ruined layers doesn't look like a war. The walls aren't broken through, they're thrown down flat. Stone snapped and shoved out of line. No ash, no bodies in the street. A city shaken to pieces from underneath. An earthquake. The Earth Shaker doing exactly what the Greeks always said he did. And Poseidon held one more title. The god of the sea, the god who split the earth, was also the god of horses. One god, the earthquake and the horse, under a single name. So watch the story grow. The walls of Troy come down in a Poseidon earthquake. Poseidon's animal is the horse, and across 3,000 years of retelling, poet after poet, each one reaching for the god's own symbol, the quake and the horse bleed together. The disaster takes the shape of an animal, until the thing that ended Troy isn't a shudder in the ground anymore. It's a horse. I'll be straight with you. This is a theory, not a verdict. No one can prove that the horse was an earthquake, but it answers something a wooden box could never. Not just how Troy fell, but why. Of everything they could have remembered, they remembered a horse. Strip away every theory for a second. Here's what's just there. In the dirt, not disputed, not a poem. One layer of Troy, the one that lines up best with the age of war, is burned, not tidied up, burned and left. Archaeologists found human remains in the streets and houses, not buried, not given rights, just where they fell. That's not what a city looks like when it loses a battle and surrenders. That's what a city looks like when it ends. And in the last years before that layer, the signs pile up, walls repaired in a hurry, food and supplies crammed into jars and buried under the floors. A whole population hoarding, bracing, waiting for something they knew was coming. And then, just last year, Digging outside of the walls, they pulled up something new. A dense pile of sling stones. Ammunition. The kind of thing you find where people stood and fought and threw everything they had. So put it together, a real city on a real hill, walls that held for years and then broke, a fire no one cleaned up, bodies no one buried, a last, desperate fight in the dirt outside the gate. Every part of that is real. We can stand on it. We can hold it in our hands. The one piece we can't find, the only piece that leaves no trace in the ground, is the horse. The single thing everyone remembers is the single thing that almost certainly never happened. Something knocked those walls down 3,000 years ago. An army, a machine, the Earth Shaker himself. We may never know for certain, but it wasn't a horse.